to take a look at those entrepreneurs that have gone ahead of us. What strategies have they actually laid ahead when it came to the tough condition, tough situations? What were those tough decisions that had to be made at that particular time? And that's why here on Smart Means Business, we have our inspirational moment. And this is the inspiration moment. Let's get inspired. Well, believe you can, and you're already halfway there. That is, of course, one of the key aspects to success. You don't assume that you're just going to be there. Assume you're already there, despite the fact that you're not already there. That way, you'll be able to overcome quite a huge number of challenges. And also, we had our business tip that said that it's important to hold events, social events. In other words, bringing the aspect of social corporate responsibility. It is something that, as an entrepreneur, it should be undertaken actually as quite a huge goal when it comes to 2024. And well, that brings us to the end of our inspiration moment at this particular time. And now heading straight back to our discussion of the African Continental Free Trade Area, like we discussed earlier on, there has been quite a huge number of developments that have been undertaken. Also, something from the African Development Bank, which had to do with land reforms on the continent as one of the key drivers to investment and promote productivity. And now, this brings us back to a very interesting discussion. Of course, we know that currently Africa's population stands at 1.4 billion people. And this is a population that is expected to double to about 2.5 billion people come 2050. So that is quite a potential advantage. What advantage are we taking use of this huge population? Of course, from my studies way back, as we growing up in the different levels of education, we normally took as we looked at a dense population as a disadvantageous. But yes, it is true if that population is kept idle. But now for Africa, a huge percentage of this population is actually of the young and vibrant young people that have the guts to work. But the only disadvantage that it poses is that despite the fact that the population are young and vibrant, they lack education, they lack skills, and these are quite key catalysts if we are talking about development of this market. Now, of course, still on that, there was actually a private sector engagement under the African Continental Free Trade Area, that is with the European Union. But of course, just a brief here, if we can take a look here. For the market, the larger population translates to a bigger consumer market, providing opportunities, that is for businesses to expand their rich economies and scales. Now, of course, increased intra-African continental trade can help tap into the growing market that is fostering the regional economic that is integration development. But of course, quite a few challenges that are still posed here, as rapid population growth brings challenges such as job creation, infrastructure development, and resource management. But of course, like I mentioned, if the population is kept idle, definitely that is going to be quite a huge disadvantage for the Africans in general, and it's going to turn out to be quite a huge burden. So investing in key sectors, priority areas, of course, in skilling and educating the young population, which is largely comprised of here. Now we had, like I mentioned, a private sector engagement of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which was aimed at fostering small and intermediary enterprises, inclusivity, and regional value chains here. Now, African countries have embarked on ambitious processes on integrating their markets beyond existing regional arrangements to create the African Continental Free Trade Area. While a trade agreement, the ambitions of the African Continental Free Trade Area go far beyond the rising, that is intra-African trade. Now, definitely, this is to establishing regional value chains and promoting continental-wide industrialization. Now, of course, beyond the reduction of tariffs and non-tariff barriers, the African Continental Free Trade Area's success will therefore depend on a range of other factors, that is, including its ability to encourage domestic and foreign investment to take advantage of expanded markets. Now, at the same time, the European Union's Global Gateway seeks to seek support, that is, to trade corridors with investments, that is, with investments and access to critical raw materials. Now, against this backdrop, the African Continental Free Trade Area Protocol on Investment represents an important investment within the African continent. Nonetheless, such formal legal mechanisms must be implemented and used to have an effect. Now, of course, raising questions for policymakers in Africa and their partners about that is how best to build on and support such mechanisms to promote the underlying goal of African economic transformation. So we can clearly see what is happening right there. And we know that there is quite huge possibilities for the African traders there to open up and actually make quite some good money for themselves, and getting rid of the surpluses, the domestic surpluses from that way. And we know that still the African Continental Free Trade Area is opening up a new era of possibilities for African trade. Of course, since colonial times, African trade has been dominated definitely by the export of commodities to more developed countries outside the continent. And now, of course, we see that raw materials such as petroleum from Angola, lithium from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and copper from Zambia are transformed into higher value products in Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Now, with limited possibilities to turn them into finished products, African countries definitely lose out. Now, of course, we see that cocoa producers such as Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana capture less than 7% of the value of the $120 billion global chocolate industry. Now, in 2021, Nigeria, one of Africa's biggest exporters of crude oil, imported $11.3 billion worth of refined petroleum products from countries like Netherlands, Belgium, and so forth. Meanwhile, trade between African countries is low. In 2017, trade with other African countries accounted for about 16.6% of African countries' total exports, while comparative figure in Europe was about 68.1%. Now, with trade going via sea to Europe, Asia, and North Africa, the continent's road and rail infrastructure has remained relatively underdeveloped, making intra-African trade both slow and expensive. Now, in addition, trade integration across the African continent has long been limited by outdated border infrastructure and a patchwork of differing regulations across dozens of markets and trade barriers, which have been erected to defend industries against regional competition. Now, the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is an ambitious trade pact, of course, which is aiming to transform the situation by turning Africa into the world's largest free trade area. When fully implemented, it will create a single market for the goods and services for almost 1.3 billion people across Africa, with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. Now, the decision to work towards the creation of the continental market for goods and services was definitely taken by the African Union in 2012. Now, the negotiations of the African Continental Free Trade Area began in 2015, and the agreement was signed by 44 of the African Union's 55 member states in Kigali, Rwanda, on 21st March 2018. And of course, the only country still not to sign is Eritrea. Now, in the words of Wamkele Mene, the head of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, the institution responsible for coordinating implementation of the agreement, that is the African Continental Free Trade Area, provides Africa with a renewed opportunity to steer its economic relations away from a reliance on external donors, talking about foreign creditors and excessive commodity dependence, ushering in a new economic era focused on self-reliant cooperation, deeper integration, and higher levels of intra-African trade. Now, in a 2020 report, the World Bank estimated that under the African Continental Free Trade Area, the volume of total exports would actually increase by almost 29% relative to business as usual by 2035. Now, the intracontinental exports would actually increase more than 81%, while exports to non-African countries would rise by 19%. Now, by May 2019, the number of states ratifying for the treaty had passed the threshold of 20 required for it to enter into force. Now, the number now stands at 47. However, while trading and the African Continental Free Trade Area officially, it commenced on 1st Jan 2021. Meaningful trade has only begun in, of course, 8 countries, and implementation is an ongoing process, and it will be years before the African Continental Free Trade Area definitely reaches its full potential. Now, we've seen all this, but many issues still to be resolved. The negotiations definitely have taken place in a number of phases, these are 3 phases. And phase 1 was completed, but that is by the ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which was accompanied by protocols on trade in services and goods and settlement disputes. Now, this provided a basis for the commencement of the free trade, but many details have not yet been resolved. For example, in here, according to my report, states have undertaken to eliminate tariffs, that is on 97% of goods and services produced by the member states, with 90% to be eliminated in equal installments over 5 years in more advanced economies, and 10 years in less developed economies. Now, states must submit their proposed tariff reduction demands, tariff reduction schedules for negotiation, but the number have also not yet, of course, including Africa's largest economy, Nigeria. So non-tariff barriers, getting rid of the tariff barriers, which has been quite a hindrance. We've seen it in the East African region, for Uganda being quite a huge victim of goods being stopped. But still away from that, I have feel something here about the battle for Africa for resource allocation. What I can call the economic partitioning of Africa, of course, by the United States of America and the Republic of China. Now, these trade wars that are happening in there are actually having quite a huge significance when it comes to determining the unity of the African market, because we definitely know the potential Africa has when it comes to being united as one. And of course, considering China's initiative, that is the Road Belt Initiative, which of course transpired with quite a number of countries, and seeing that almost 70% of the countries part of China's Road Belt Initiative are actually African countries. And now this is looking at a way of interconnecting different African nations. And I think China has actually played quite a huge role in making sure this happens. We saw something, the railway that links between Ethiopia to, I think, Djibouti, accomplished. And the trade amongst those two nations is actually improving. We saw a bridge that was constructed in Mozambique, still by China. Yes, it is actually promoting connectivity of the region, of those different regions in Mozambique. We saw the construction of the East Africa, the gauge railway with Kenya. That is when it comes to, connectivity. Though, of course, reports still reveal that it has not yet been profitable yet enough. And of course, some Western propagandists suggesting that probably Kenya was being put into a day trap. But of course, talking about a day trap, I don't really agree with that, because China still forgave quite a number of African countries of their debts. Of course, Somalia was inclusive, and I think Ethiopia, yes, part of that. So all these aspects, we need to look into them, taking a look at foreign influence. And with Africa, having to be quite very careful what side to be with. Now, getting into the phase 2 negotiations, this led to the adaptation of draft protocols on intellectual property rights, talking about investment and competition policy in February 2023. Now, the protocol on competition will require many countries to enact laws to promote healthy competition, and will be overseen by the African Continental Free Trade Area Authority. Now, a further protocol on women and youth in trade is yet to be negotiated, and will address the specific barriers that these groups face through legally binding commitments. And finally, phase 3 negotiations for protocol and digital trade are still underway, as the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat recently incorporated feedback from state and non-state parties into a second draft of that protocol. Now, this contains sections on digital product market access, talking about robust data governance frameworks, and a focus on digital inclusion with no articles geared towards online safety. Now, of course, the promotion of the digital entrepreneurship and the drive towards enhancing skills is definitely underway. And finally, of course, that is involving the private sector. Of course, significant milestones achieved under this within a relatively short period of time is a testament of the political will and power of cooperation, shared vision of Africa's political leadership, and the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretary General, that is Wemkele, and many who told in a meeting in Nairobi, that was in May. But he also stressed that this will not only will not achieve any success without involvement of the private sector, which is estimated to account for around 80% of production and employing 90% of the working age population. Of course, that brings us to the end of this discussion. Of course, African Continental Free Trade Area, of course, which I really see that the biggest hindrance might be political related factors. Of course, different interests by the African nations taking certain economic decisions due to political interests. That is quite the huge issue here. The divide and rule policies still interplay here, of course, which were planted, rooted all the way from the colonial masters. But of course, this will call for a huge unification message, talking about economic unity, political unity in all aspects of life. Exactly 24 minutes past 8, the Smart Means Business, the African Continental Free Trade Area Insights within. But of course, later on, like I told you, we shall be having guests. I'll be having a panel here as we break down still factors, big points of discussion of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Well, Smart Means Business takes a break for now. And of course, we return with the sports and business in sports and entertainment. Stick around.